Yeah, so good afternoon and welcome you all to our MBL series on missionary ecclesiology. And I think it's a good afternoon from our end to those of you who are in different part of the world. Good morning. And we have today Steve Bevans, who will be doing a presenting and talking about his latest book, and also bringing in some insights from that book. And I do not even know whether we need to introduce Steve at all. He's quite well known, but maybe I will just share some small point. So as I'm sure we all know that he has served as the president of the American Society of Missiology and now served on the editorial board. He was also a member of the World Council of Churches Commission on World Mission and Evangelism. I'm sure we all know, especially I knew him when I was a student from his book Models of Contextual Theology, where he argues that all theology is contextual, whether it's practical theology or systematic theology. And another famous popular book is Constant in Context, A Theology of Mission for Today. This is also a book that I grew up with in the sense of my theological journey in reflecting on mission. And we also have other books like Introduction to Theology in Global Perspective, Mission and Culture, and Essays in Contextual Theology, which are quite popular and used in seminaries and theological institutions as primary books for studying and reflecting on theology. So, yes, he's an American Catholic priest, a theologian, and a professor emeritus at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, Illinois. So with that, I will give the floor over to Steve. And even if he wants to share a little bit of himself, he's most welcome to do, but perhaps he'll bring himself in during his lecture. So over to you, Steve.
Well, thank you very much, Marina, and good morning, good afternoon to all of you. Wherever you are. I think for Christine, if she is in California, it's very, very early in the morning. It's six in the morning for her. It's just 8 in the morning for me in Chicago. So it's not that bad. I'm really very, very happy to be with you. I've been looking forward to sharing this and to sharing with you about my new book. This is the book. It's quite a thick book, and I'll talk about the making of the book and the contents of the book as well. I'm going to share my screen now. Here we are. And I think that this will work. So as you see, the title of my book is Community of Missionary Disciples, and the subtitle is The Continuing Creation of the Church. I'll explain both of those title and subtitle as I go along. But let me begin by talking about how this book is a book that really, in many ways, is a work of my whole life. It took a lifetime to write and complete this book. So for the last 10 years, at least, I think, maybe even more, I've been wanting to write this book on the church. And it was in the lockdown during COVID-19, the COVID-19 pandemic, that gave me the space and the time to start writing. There was nothing else to do, and I had wanted to write the book, so I said, okay, finally I have a chance to write it. And then I completed it off and on in the next 3 years when Zoom meetings became more frequent and everything. My time was cut into an awful lot, and so writing the book took a little bit longer than I thought it was. than I thought it would be. But if truth be told, as I say, the book actually took me 50 years to write. Um, I began teaching ecclesiology back in 1974. I was very young. I was just 30 years old, fresh from completing the licentiate at the Gregorian University in Rome. And I was teaching at the Archdiocesan Major Seminary in Vigan, Ilocos in the Philippines. This is a picture of the seminary on the right. I taught the course every year I was in the Philippines until 1981 when I left the Philippines. And then I taught it a good many times in my 29 years of teaching at Catholic Theological Union. I've taught the course in Australia, I've taught it in the Philippines, and I've taught it maybe 20 times in our renewal program, sabbatical program that we have at CTU that's named after the former president of the great University of Notre Dame, Theodore Hesburgh. So it was called the Hesburgh Sabbatical Program. So my book, therefore, as I say, is a work of a lifetime. And it reflects my growth in understanding the missionary nature of the church through these last 50 years. And that understanding began when I was in the Philippines and beginning to teach the course, when I really realized the radical import of Vatican II's document on missionary activity and the phrase in paragraph 2 of that document that the Pilgrim Church is missionary by its very nature because it participates in the life of the Trinity. And I don't know the date or the time, but I can pinpoint, that moment in my office preparing class when when the phrase really began to make sense to me. And I realized that the church, it not only will always have a mission, but mission, of course, the mission of God is actually constitutive of the church. It is what calls the church forth. And without mission, the church would simply cease to exist, would not exist. Now, this understanding that I had back in about 1974, maybe 1975, continued to grow as I gradually began to realize the missionary and intercultural nature as well of all Christian theology. Since all theology is rooted in the overflowing life of a missionary God. And so it's always rooted in culture, context, and history, and the history of where it is done. And my understanding of this has culminated in the last 11 years during the papacy of Pope Francis, whose great work back in 2013, Evangelii Gaudium, or The Joy of the Gospel, gave me the title for my book, and whose open and fresh leadership style, which is rooted in God's mercy and tenderness and the dignity of baptism, I think articulated clearly what had been my deepest instincts about the church and its missionary task. My instincts about this were confirmed after I finished writing the book, when I read just about a year ago now, Francis' groundbreaking apostolic letter that's called Ad Theologiam Promovendam, which I translated as in order to move theology forward. And in this very short 4-page or so document, he states emphatically that to a synodal church, which is missionary and going forth, there cannot but correspond a theology that goes forth. And he talked about the fact that in the first place, theology is a fundamental contextual theology. This is, to my knowledge, the first time that the Roman magisterium uses this phrase contextual theology to talk about the reality of theology. Marina mentioned that in my book, Models of Contextual Theology, in the second edition, the first line that I have in the book is, there is no such thing as theology, there's only contextual theology. Well, I think in terms of ecclesiology, I would say something similar. There's no such thing as the church. There's only a missionary church. So to be perfectly frank, I really could not have written this book without the leadership of Pope Francis, his deep missionary commitment to calling the church to go forth, his love of the image of the church as the holy people of God, all of whom are anointed with the wisdom of the Spirit. And Francis's tireless work, despite, as you may know, strong opposition from the highest quarters in the Catholic Church, to make the church a listening, participative, and synodal church. In many ways, my book offers the same insights on the church that I taught my students 50 years ago in Vigan and in Chicago for many, many years. But I think this book could never have become the book it became without Pope Francis. I would also say that I could not have written this book without my participation in a community where I have ministered for the last 22 years. It's called the St. Giles Family Mass Community, and it is a community in a parish in one of the western suburbs of Chicago named Oak Park. And in the acknowledgments to my book, I write, Carl Morello, pastor of St. Giles Catholic Church in Oak Park, Illinois, and the entire St. Giles Family Mass community have given me more inspiration than I can express in my 2 decades long ministry among them. They have made it possible for me to believe that a church of missionary disciples is no fanciful vision, but a reality. In a way, my book is a theoretical, what the British Catholic theologian Nicholas Healy calls a blueprint ecclesiology. It's what the church should be and what I think it is in its deepest reality. But it also, I think, comes out of my experience of, as I say, 22 years working in this marvelous, intentional ecclesial community. So it really does come out of my own pastoral practice and the pastoral and the ecclesial life of this wonderful community. So I want to talk now about the shape and the content of the book. The book's introduction offers a kind of what I call working definition of the church. It's one that I developed over the years with the critiques and help and insights of my students and my colleagues. And realizing, of course, that the church can never be defined, I offer the following, as they say, working definition. And I spend a good part of the introduction unpacking the tradition or unpacking the definition. So here's the definition. It's a mouthful, really, but the church is God's pilgrim people, called and gathered by the Spirit in all its diversity, in faith in the risen Christ, in order to embody, demonstrate, and proclaim the reign of God, which it believes was inaugurated in and through Jesus, whose mission it shares and continues, both within the church and within the world, and celebrates and is nourished by word and sacrament for its missionary life. As I say, there's a lot in this definition, but let me just highlight a few points. The church is, first of all, a people. It's a pilgrim people, a people on the move. It's not a voluntary society, but it's the work of grace. It's gathered by the Spirit. And it's gathered by the Spirit of those who have faith in the risen Christ. And this faith in the risen Christ is the key. It's the cornerstone, really, of what the church is all about. And the Spirit calls the people into the church as they are in their cultural and contextual identity. The purpose of the church, the reason for the church, is mission. We're called into the church by the Spirit in faith in Christ in order to embody, to demonstrate, and to proclaim not ourselves, not the church, not itself, but the reign of God. And this order, I think, is significant because we must first embody the reign of God, demonstrate it in our lives, in the way we act, before we can actually proclaim the good news of the gospel. The reign that we proclaim, the reign of God, is here already within the church and also outside the boundaries of the church as well. And all of this is celebrated in word and sacrament to sustain the church in mission. And so liturgy, our worship is actually a missionary act. So that's the definition of the church and a little bit of breaking it open, which of course I do in the whole rest of the book. The body of the book is divided into 3 parts, and it has 5 chapters in each part. And each of the 3 parts emphasizes one word in the book's title, which is, of course, community of missionary disciples, a phrase of Pope Francis from his document, The Joy of the Gospel. So my task was to write a missionary ecclesiology. And I think that's an important phrase, a missionary ecclesiology, because I realized that ecclesiology, as it had been written and taught and so forth, has rarely been missionary enough. And missiology, I've found, has rarely been ecclesiological enough. And so I wanted to bring these 2 realities together. A missionary church that I talk about is one that is never founded or it's never complete. Jesus, the Christ, of course, is the foundation of the church. Faith in the risen Christ is the keystone, the foundation of the church. But the church is being continually founded or created as it follows Christ's Spirit into new situations, into new horizons, into new cultures. And this is the point of the subtitle of the book, The Continuing Creation of the Church. So my book is written from an unabashedly Roman Catholic perspective, but it's also deeply ecumenical. It draws on Orthodox, Protestant, and evangelical theologians, and especially the work of the World Council of Churches, with whom, as Marina mentioned in her introduction, I was a member of the Commission on World Mission and Evangelism from 2014 to 2022. And so I've been closely associated with the World Council of Churches. And Risto, I thank you for your leadership in a great part of that time that I was with the World Council of Churches. So the understanding that I bring to the church is multivalent. So the church is, as I understand it, is both universal and local. The church is made by the Eucharist, so it emerges in the Eucharistic community. It includes any church community that is rooted in faith in the risen Christ. And because of a challenge of an Indian friend of mine, it also includes, I think, people in insider movements as well. People who are not able to like officially join the church, but who nevertheless believe in the lordship of the risen Christ. So it's a very inclusive understanding of the church. So part one is entitled Community of Missionary Disciples. And this part one, unlike most ecclesiologies that I have read, begins with mission. Chapter one speaks of God's mission from the beginning of creation. As I say, the Spirit and the Word dance through history in general, and Israel's history in particular. In the fullness of time, the Word, through the Spirit, becomes flesh in Jesus of Nazareth, as God emptying God's self in mission, loving us unto the end, and even to death on a cross. That's the first chapter of the book. I end by saying that in Jesus's death and resurrection, Jesus has shared his spirit with the disciples. And then in chapter 2, as I look closely at especially the first 11 chapters of the Acts of the Apostles, I talk about how through the guidance of the Spirit, that small group of disciples became the church. And then the church exists to embody, demonstrate, and proclaim what the African-American theologian Willie Jennings calls the revolutionary intimacy of the reign of God. So in chapter 3, I talk about the relationship of the church to the reign of God. And in chapter 4, I talk about the nature of mission. I call it the mission that calls forth the church. Mission as a complex reality that can't be reduced to one aspect, like the proclamation of the gospel or the work for justice, but is a complex reality, much as the way that Roger Schrader and I talk about it in context. And then the final chapter in chapter 1 is the way the church that does mission. The church does mission through a method of, again, familiar to those who may know my work and Roger's work, in the method of prophetic dialogue, as, to use Pope Francis's phrase, a listening synodal church. And then part two focuses on the church as a community of missionary disciples. It reflects on the mystery of the church as a community of missionary disciples. So here I talk about the fact that the church is not so much an idea to be understood, but rather a mystery to be lived in, and to be lived out. And it's in the living that we come to an understanding that the church is no mere human organization, but as Pope Paul VI said back in 1964 at the beginning of the second session of Vatican II, the church is a reality imbued with the hidden presence of God. Now, this part has two sections. The first section attempts to develop the three traditionally major images of the church: the people of God, the body of Christ, and the temple or creation of the Spirit. But it tries to do this from a missionary perspective. I try to argue that all of these are missionary images of the church. The people of God is a people chosen in continuity with Israel as a blessing for the nations. And then the image of the church as the body of Christ points to the fact that the church is the continuing presence and mission of Christ that shares in God's very nature through baptism. And then the church is the creation of God's Spirit, ever new in new circumstances, the very presence of God in the world, God's temple, God's presence in the world. And then in the second section of this second part of the book, I talk about the four dimensions or marks of the church. But the development here is novel in two senses. First of all, the marks are, as it were, turned upside down. And so the discussion begins with apostolicity. I'm very influenced here by Darrell Guder and the missional church movement that talk about the fact that the marks of the church should be turned upside down, and we begin with apostolicity. But then second, and here I'm influenced very much by Charles Van Engen, the marks are conceived not as adjectives, but as verbs, or perhaps we could say verbal adjectives. The marks describe the church's deepest reality, yes, but they are also missionary tasks to the church itself and also the church in the world. So a missionary ecclesiology begins with the mark of apostolicity, since it is rooted in fidelity to the apostolic commission. And it's from that fidelity, that doctrinal fidelity, continuity, and apostolic succession in office have their roots, not the other way around. Catholicity is that dimension of the church that holds the local and the universal together, and is the constant task of the church to itself, to make itself more Catholic, of course, with a small c, and also to make the world more Catholic in the sense of to recognize the importance of the local and the cultures and contexts and so forth. But then also that people should be connected one another throughout the world. Holiness, I think, only makes sense if the church embraces its sinfulness and shines to the world not as its own holiness, but rather as God's holiness. And so the task of holiness is to make the world holy, to make the world in right relationship with God, and also to point to the holiness in the world's various contexts and religious communities. And finally, unity is the unity of the Trinity. Again, that ecumenism is absolutely an essential task of the mission of the church. Um, and also that the church works to make the world one in the diversity of the in the unity and diversity of the Trinity. So part 3 of the book is entitled A Community of Missionary Disciples. In this section, I try to develop the church's structure by avoiding what I consider the dangerous and harmful binary of clergy and laity. And so I use throughout the image of discipleship. And here I'm influenced again by Pope Francis, but also by the World Council of Churches' emphasis on transforming discipleship as well. So I often talk about the church as a community of transforming missionary disciples. So discipleship is first shared by all members of the church. Ironically, I like to say the first structure of the church is that there's no structure at all, but it's based on a fundamental equality based on baptism. So I talk about the fact that all Christians are baptismal missionary disciples and participate, all Christians, in the mission of the church. But the church needs order and leadership, of course. And so there emerges what I call a ministerial missionary discipleship. That's exercised occasionally and informally, but also formally and more permanently. This is what has been called lay ministry. Um, and then overseeing all baptismal missionary disciples and ministerial missionary disciples is ordained missionary discipleship. So ordained missionary discipleship offers leadership and order to the local, to the regional, and to the universal church. So my mantra as I go through this section is that the structure of the church must serve mission. So often we've seen that the mission of the church is shaped by the structure of the church. But I think it should be the other way around. That the structure of the church, the way we organize what we do in the church should serve mission. So I think it should be able to change. It should be able to be different in different cultural and contextual and historical situations. So structure serves mission. 2 works of art grace my book. First of all, the first is a wonderful cover that was painted at my invitation by my friend and former student, a man by the name of John Christman. During the writing of the book, it struck me forcefully that a powerful image of a pilgrim missionary church was the Filipino custom. So I go back to my original missionary days, the Filipino custom of what is called bayanihan. In Tagalog, bayan means people. And the custom of bayanihan is embodied when a whole village turns out to move a neighbor's house in the village to a different location. So the cover image is a picture of Bayanihan in action, but not moving a house, but obviously moving a church building to somehow signify that this is an image of the church. So it depicts a people on the move, as it were, bearing the church on their backs, reminiscent of 1 Corinthians 3:9. Paul writes, "You are God's building." And this is a people joyfully celebrating as they go. And readers will note that not all in the picture are Filipinos. There are some Africans there. There's a white people there. I see Latino people there and so forth, Asian people, of course, and Filipinos. And this is a nod to Catholicity, with an emphasis on the local, but always a connection to the church's universality. So I think it captures in some way the understanding of a missionary church that I want to present in my book. Then the other piece of art featured in the book is a poem, which is entitled "Church as a Verb." It appears right in the beginning of the book. It's by a man by the name of Godfrey Rust, who is an Anglican pastor and poet from the UK. I've never met Godfrey, but I got his permission to use the poem in the beginning of the book. He's a member of the Church Mission Society, the Pioneer program at the Church Mission Society. The poem, as I say, appearing before the text of the book, highlights the living, moving nature of the church and also the church's elusiveness. The church can never be reduced to a noun, to its leaders, or to a physical building, or to an institutional society. So here's the poem. Church mice, church music, and church history all try to tell us it's an adjective. Others have chiseled or boxed it into a noun, a building, or a social club. But don't be fooled. Church is a verb. It's something that we do. It won't work in the singular. I can't church. You can't church. He, she, and it can't church. It only takes the plural. Even God can't church alone. We church. And they can do it too, whatever we may think of what they do. It works best in the present tense and not with a prefix like un or re. Don't say, let's church again like we did last summer. It happens now, not then. It's not a complicated verb. It comes in simple sentences like, how are you? Can I help? And let us pray. It's often passive and just sits and listens. It's a highly irregular verb and won't do what it's told. It turns up anywhere and with the most unlikely subjects. It can be said in any language or in none. We can't easily go to look at church. We only find the evidence that church has happened somewhere. Something broken is mended. Someone is alive. Two are one. More is here now than was before. In one case only, this verb is transitive. God churches us and also churches through us. when we ask Christ to be among us or make him known to someone, it's then that we are churching. There will come a time for church to get dressed up, ready for its marriage, ready to settle down and become a noun. But until then, church is the living word spoken in verbs. So, conclusion, this picture of me was taken just about 2 weeks ago in Korea. I just came back from Korea, and I was giving a talk there on my book. There's a lot more to say about my book. It's a book, after all, that's well over 400 pages. But like every one of my books, writing it was a wonderful journey of discovery. At the beginning, I thought I knew exactly what I was going to write, but the Spirit really had other ideas. And I'm sure in the writing, I learned much more than my readers will. But if you do read my book, which I hope you will, I hope you'll learn something from it as well. So with that, I want to stop my sharing and finish my presentation. And I hope that perhaps we can have a bit of a discussion in the time that we have left. So Marina, there we are.
Thank you very much, Steve. It was a really nice, I would say, presentation of the church in verb, as in churching, that we're not, church is not static, it's not a building, but we continue to church and we are churching. I really like that phrase. And I won't start with a question, but would like to see whether there any one of you have any question or comments to make. The one on screen, you can just click on the, raising hand. You will find that at the bottom. And yes, on the floor, does anyone has something to comment or asked? Okay, while they're still reflecting on which of the many questions they want to ask. Steve, I was very intrigued with what you said about that the emphasis is on the local and not on Catholicity. So can you please, give a little bit more explanation on that?
Yeah. Yeah, sure. So often when you hear the term Catholicity is defined as universal, but that's not really accurate. What Catholicity means is a reverence for a cultivation of the local in contact with the universal. So the church is not, first of all, a universal reality, but it's first of all a communion of local churches. So that's I think the meaning of Catholicity. I think this helps with ecumenism, and it helps certainly in a big church like the Roman Catholic Church. We are not, first of all, a big universal blob as such, but we are individual local communities in communion with one another, and that's what makes what we call the Catholic Church, and that's what makes, I think, the mark of the church as Catholic. And so it's a constant task of the church to itself to work to make itself this community of local churches. And as I say, I think it's a secular task as well, which is, I think, a deeply holy task and a religious task to help people understand their own, identity as cultural and historical subjects. And yet, at the same time, not be isolated in that, not a nationalism, not a tribalism, but a true universal connection. So that's how I understand this idea of Catholicity.
Yeah, thank you. Kristen?
Thank you very much, Steve. Really enjoyed the presentation.
Thank
But
you.
I have also read the book, so it was good to have highlighted from you where it all came from and how it hangs together. So, and I really appreciate what you're doing in the book. My question is around you mentioned your indebtedness to the World Council of Churches.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could. I'm looking at the Church Toward a Common Vision, which was came out in
Yes.
2013.
Yeah.
That it, I was on the Commission for World Mission Evangelism at the time,
Right.
and or at least, yeah, I just was stepping off at that point. But yes, that was the end of our time, and we had first of all looked at the Faith and Order document, the nature and mission of the church,
Right.
which, as you complain, puts church first, and mission as as something that comes out of it. So we actually had a joint meeting of both, and of both commissions, or parts of both commissions. And we, from the CWME, we strongly said, no, it's got to be the other way around. Surely mission comes before the church. And you're showing more clearly, I think, than that document that is the case. But it really is such a different approach from the earlier one. So I wondered, I put you on the spot about whether you think that achieves the kind of aims that you're talking about, or if you go further than that in some ways.
Well, I think it does to a certain extent. Yeah, I quote the document here and there in in the book. What I find is that the first chapter of that document, the Church Toward a Common Vision, is really excellent, and it talks about the missionary nature of the church. But then the rest of the document seems to like just go back to the same old understanding of the church. And so that's where what I try to do, in mine is to push it further, so that the images of the church are missionary images, and the marks of the church are, and that that mission is what should determine the way ministry is structured in the church, and things like that. So I appreciate that document very, very much. And I really appreciate the fact that the CWME, was able to, at least in name, reverse that idea of nature and mission. It's too bad they didn't entitle the document "The Mission and Nature of the Church," instead of just toward, kind of a neutral name, toward a common understanding. But I think it's a great step in the right direction. It's really interesting. And Risto, you may remember this, at one of our CWME meetings in 21 or early 22, I'm not sure. We had, what's the woman's name who's the head of Susan Derber, who is the head of the Faith and Order Commission, and she oversaw much of the writing of this, and she was at our CWME meeting, and she said that the critiques that were coming from all over the world about the document, about the reception of the document, was that it wasn't missionary enough. And so even Faith and Order recognize that fact, and we talked. I don't know if it'll ever happen, but we talked about CWME and Faith and Order really have to work more closely together. As I mentioned, I think all our theology, it's not just ecclesiology, all our theology has to be, infused with the understanding of mission. Because what's theology for? It's to understand the church so that the gospel can be proclaimed more clearly. And so in a way, it's a false dichotomy to have faith and order on one side and mission on the other. They should be really working together. And sometimes CWME isn't theological enough, and most of the time faith and order isn't missionary enough. And so the two, I really think, have to work together. So yeah, so that's what I would say. I have a feeling you agree with that. We chair in YAMS. Kirstine and I co-chair the Theology of Mission group, and we're both on the. Kirstine is the lead editor on the Brill series, Theology of Mission and World Christianity, and so we try to do that, and I know Kirstine, you are very strong in this regard as well. So we're certainly companions in this regard. Yeah.
Yeah, before I ask Nishat and Kunle, Risto, you had unmuted yourself. Did you want to say anything?
No, just wanted to confirm what Steve was saying, that we really wanted to have these two commissions of the World Council of Churches coming closer together and working closer together. But I just had a short comment to Steve, because Marina, thank you for giving me the floor. I think, Steve, that what you are saying is a wonderful illustration of how we can, through God's mission, getting to understanding of church closer together. The one kind of, faith and order type of visible unity, and only visible unity is a kind of illustration of church unity. And on the other hand, this kind of Protestant pietistic type of understanding of unity, spiritual unity, that it's enough when I have faith in Christ and I have a good relations with my fellow Christians who have the true faith in Christ, and that's it. And then it stops there. So mission is a kind of bridge between these two types of understanding.
Yeah. Thank you, Risto. Yeah.
Yes, Nishat, to unmute yourself. Yes.
Thank you, Professor Bevans. It's a very happy moment for me to see you online for the first time as a student of missiology. Your book, Constance in Context, is a textbook every student of missiology has in India. And I really thank OCMS for giving this opportunity to participate in this session. I purchased your book as soon as it was released on Amazon, and I have written a book review in Acta Missiology published by
Wonderful. Oh, great.
And your book has inspired me to reread it, and I am really waiting to go for it a second time.
Wonderful.
I really appreciate the way you focus on the importance of the missionary church and what our basic foundation should be while we attempt at mission. At the end of my reading, I had a few, I don't know whether it is doubts or concerns. How do you place the individual in a missionary church? And how do you see the responsibility of an individual when he is part of the church to facilitate in the process of mission work? And another concern is that we have a lot of very fast changing realities in the world today, large scale migration, the consequences of war, and on the other side, many of the LGBTQ communities trying to exert their rights. So as a pilgrim people, as a pilgrim church, how can we envisage our missionary outlook towards these social realities? And last, I would surely expect a companion to this book if you could incorporate the Orthodox and evangelical understandings also of the Pilgrim Church. It's a personal request. Once again, it's an honor for me, and I thank OCMS. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Steve.
Yeah, I think to the last remark first, I think that this devolves upon Orthodox theologians and evangelical and Pentecostal theologians who write companion volumes to this. I can kind of hint at it, but I'm a subject of the Roman Catholic Church. I mean, that's my identity, and so it comes out of that. So I'd love to see, the same thing happen with an Orthodox theologian who's in dialogue with all the various families of Christianity, do the same kind of thing, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and to see it, from different contexts as well. I mean, I write, I mean, I have a lot of experience in the world church and so forth, but I'm an American. I write from my context, and you can't escape that as much as you want to, because you also have to be specific. In terms of the individual in the church, certainly, I mean, I think that membership in the church, as I say, depends on personal faith, in the lordship of the risen Christ, and that means, I think, if one takes Jesus as one's Lord, that one participates in his mission. I mean, and that's what it means, I think, to be a Christian, to continue the work of Christ in the world. And so every baptized member of the church participates directly in the mission of the church. And this is done, in many different ways, of course, but I think the main way is, to live a life of witness of Christian faith and Christian values, and to speak and to profess, when one is called upon to do that, so I think that's, different people have different gifts, and will do different things as they as they live out this. But I think as we recognize our transformation of our very selves through baptism, I mean, I think that we are called to witness in word and deed in various ways, all of us, and some are called to be leaders and formators of this. And this is where I see ministry. I have one chapter, as you know, Nishad, in the book. I talk about baptismal missionary discipleship, and then before I get into ministry, I talk about a theology of leadership, because I think that's the key thing for what ministry is about. And then eventually talk. I have 2 chapters on ordained ministry, the history of ministry, which is really a history of ordained ministry, because the ordained have grabbed all the the ministry in the church over the years. And then a contemporary theology of ministry, let's say, anchored in for the Roman Catholic Church, Vatican II, and Pope Francis. So and then Well, your second question, I'm sorry. You.
Yeah, how as a pilgrim church can we address the social realities?
Yes, yes. Well, I think that what I write in chapter 5 is in many ways the answer to that. You know, that chapter is called "The Dialogue That Calls Forth the Church," and I talk about prophetic dialogue. And prophetic dialogue, I've developed it over the years. It's much more developed than in Constance and Context, where we were just kind of like beginning to understand this. And I see it, you know, very much in terms of, you know, in every pastoral situation, you know, the church should come together, you know, having, you know, in a kind of an openness to the world around it, to the culture around it, and so forth, an openness to all the gifts that the people bring in the community, you know, and discuss together, work together, pray together to find out, you know, what is the most prophetic way that we can be church in this particular situation at this particular time. So, you know, rather than a preset program for the church, you know, what I've come to see is that mission is the result of contextual theologizing. And it's a contextual theologizing that we do together in community, you know, in dialogue with our world, in dialogue with each other, to somehow come up with prophetic action that we can do. Now, that prophetic action might be simply to enter into interreligious dialogue, you know, with people, or to work together, you know, as Christians and Muslims, or Christians and Hindus, whatever it might be, you know, or it might mean, you know, that the time is ripe to, you know, to preach the word, you know, you know, or to improve our worship style. You know, I mean, it could be all sorts of things, you know, but I think it has to come out of, you know, real communal discernment, you know, in prayer. And so it becomes a real spirituality of discernment that from which we do mission. You know, so I'm playing a lot with this idea that, you know, we used to think, oh, we knew exactly what to do when we did mission. You know, we went into a place and we, you know, built a church building and we set up, you know, this. I think that, you know, these pre-programmed approaches are not the way we should do mission. It should be as a result of communal discernment in every situation, the result of a contextual discernment that we have. So that's, you know, so chapter 5 of the book, I think, is really important to answer your question. And of course, you've read it, so you know.
Yeah, thank you. Then we now will have Kunle, then after that Chama, and then John Patrick. Kunle. Unmute yourself, Kunle.
He's speaking.
No.
Yes, now we can hear you. No, Kunle, we can't hear you. You have to unmute yourself. Okay, we cannot hear you. Unmute yourself, put your microphone on. Okay, while you're figuring that out.
Okay, all right, okay. Thank you.
Oh,
thank
there
you.
you go. Okay, all right.
Oh, thank you very much. This is Kunle from Nigeria. It's quite great to listen to you directly after interacting with you through many of your writings and materials. I'm happy to listen to you directly this afternoon. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Yeah.
I want to take you back to 20 years ago.
Okay.
And also relates to the current book you have written.
Mm-hmm.
In 2004, in Context,
Mm-hmm.
a theology of mission for today,
Mm-hmm.
written by you and Schroeder.
Roger Schroeder, yeah.
You mentioned 6 constants.
Mm-hmm.
Christianity, ecclesiology,
Mm-hmm.
eschatology,
Mm-hmm.
anthropology,
Mm-hmm.
salvation, and culture. That they are very fundamentals
Mm-hmm.
to how the church lives and practice
Mm-hmm.
its mission. Now, I want to find out what are the steps and some of the studies done in the past that made these 6 constants as very great in missionary movement and seeing the church as people of mission and missionary disciples. How significantly are there any other constants different from these panoply that help the church world to fulfill its missionary calling? I want to learn more about that because I try to use some of these in my thesis, which I concluded in 2023. So seeing you today has made me to ask further questions about some of these lofty theological ideas you got over 50 years experience.
Yeah.
And secondly, you spoke about the harmful binary between the lay and the clergy.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And in Konga theological imperatives of the importance of laity in Catholic Church, he spoke about the bottom line, that the laity are the supply side of mission within Catholicism, within Catholic Church. I want you to throw more light on that. Thank you very much.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Konye. To your first question, I don't think that we, in Constance and Context, we wanted to be too exclusive about these constants, but if you have so many of them, it gets a little bit difficult to manage. So, like, for instance, there are some people that say, well, what about Trinity? What about the Holy Spirit? These kinds of things. And we just say Christology. Well, of course, in this year of at least coming up of the anniversary of Nicaea, I think you could say that, well, to use the phrase, Christ is the key, So Nicaea was actually, at least implicitly, a Trinitarian formulation, and eventually, of course, it develops that way, with Constantinople and so forth. So the Christological could actually be unpacked into a more Trinitarian and pneumatological understanding. I do think that maybe the other ones there. I think it kind of runs the gamut of what we want to say. You could say that maybe anthropology and culture could be conflated together, perhaps. I don't know. But I think that what we were trying to say is that there are at least these 6 constants, and again, they are constants in terms of questions or areas rather than fixed contents, So it's mission. Our point is that mission always should be about Christ. It always has to have an ecclesial dimension. It always has to have an eschatological dimension, a soteriological dimension, an anthropological dimension, and a cultural dimension. And this is so these are the constants. And again, depending on the context, they take on content. So that was the idea. Regarding your second question, I'm actually very much influenced by Yves Congar, and his work in this regard. It's interesting, later in his life, although Congar would still use the terms laity and lay and ordained, or laity and clergy, but he said, we shouldn't really have that kind of a dichotomy, that the most important thing, in the church is baptism, and so he has these kind of concentric circles that he uses in a 1972 article, I think it is, that he has, that baptism is the whole reality, and then within that there are different gifts that baptism has. 1 Corinthians 12, Romans 12, however you want to see it, so this baptismal reality is differentiated into ordained ministry and so forth. I'm trying to push Congar a little further, because I find that, these, if we rather would say that, the main thing is that we're all disciples. We're all,
right.
To use the full phrase, transforming missionary disciples, and that's the most important thing. And that if we, are, if I could use a negative, not ordained and yet participate in ministry, we're still disciples. And that when we're ordained, we're still disciples. And our whole identity is to lead and foster and to form as ministers disciples. So that's the key for me, because what I find, at least in the Catholic Church, and it might be, I suspect it's in other churches as well, but the clergy are always saying, well, the laity are trying to take power from us. They're trying to take, otherwise we won't have anything to do, or we aren't special anymore, or the laity will say, the clergy have too much power, so we want to take some of that, Rather, the power exists, in the church, and it's and the more the power is shared, the larger it grows, and the greater it is. So rather than saying I want more power or I'm getting less power, let's say that we are all equals in the church, and we have different gifts, to express, the mission of the church. So that's how I see it. It's very ideal in many ways. I think it demands a conversion, to baptism. It demands a conversion to discipleship. But I think that's what is needed, I think, because I just think that, clergy laity is a dead end, so.
Yeah, thank you. Chama.
Thank you. I'm
Thank you
sorry.
so. Sorry.
No.
Thank you so much, Steve. I really appreciate listening to you. I'm not sure whether you can hear me. I'm right at the back. Difficult to see. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Thank you so.
Okay. Oh, there you are.
Just a quick question. I think from here, I know there is a lot of richness in what you have presented to us, and I am particularly amazed that actually what you are presenting here is a quite disruptive, especially in understanding what it means to be a missionary. Because your book is marking this as a historical marker to start again rethinking the very idea of missionary into this. But what I'm wondering from my side, I think this is also coming from Christian Schema's argument and also the book that they've written. It's a language itself. Why do we need to use the language of missionary in the context that is seeming quite resistant, even to use a concept like Missio Dei? Most of the people feel like this language is still very prominently colonial language. We probably need new language. I think Kim and the group that has dealt with some of these questions, they've tried to go to other concepts and those kind of stuff that they are doing there. I'm just like, how do you bring into this conversation? I don't know, I know there is not much time, but also connected to that is the fact that we are living in the world that is so pluralistic, especially in terms of religions. If we define the church so distinctively in terms of its positionality, what room is there in this missionary ecclesiology in terms of beyond dialogue? I know there's been a lot of talk about dialogue, interreligious activities, theologies of religions, and all those things, but just beyond that, we are dealing with so many forces that are actually disrupting the very ideas of mission, the ecological challenges, but also religious pluralism, especially in the Asian context and Africa. How do you define and extend this pilgrimage of missionary ecclesiology in terms of this context and its language? I know you are not going to answer that. I know it's a waste of time, no time. But just that I'm raising, just to think about anyway.
Yeah.
Do you have anything to say? Yes, please, Steve.
Yes, I mean, I know as one of my friends, I quote this a lot. One of my friends, Peter Fahn, once said, mission is not an innocent word. It has all sorts of baggage, and I realize that. But honestly, I don't know any other word that we can use. I mean, some people, will say, well, evangelization, but that's the same thing. I think that it's the same thing, and other people have used, other words. I know that there are books written, trying to find other language. I welcome that. I welcome that, but I just don't know if there's anything. So I think in some ways, what we need to do is to redeem the word rather than than chuck the word, than throw it away. I don't know, but I know some people, they hear the word and they just like go crazy, but I think it's just a word that we are we're just stuck with, and until we can find something better, it's fine. The way I have begun to talk about mission, and you see this in my book, is that I talk about, mission is, the church's mission is about participating, is about working with God in the completion of God's creation. So it's a much more cosmic, kind of idea, and I love, Christine, your book on the Holy Spirit, where you begin with Rowan Williams' definition of mission, finding out where the Spirit is working and joining in. And I think he piggybacks on an idea from John Taylor, that he says that you find out where God is working and you join in, and I think, so those are, for me, it's not so much, focusing on extending the church or anything like that, but working with God to complete creation, and I think that doesn't deny all the other ways of talking about mission, but I think it makes it broader. And now I've forgotten again, your second question. The second question was.
No, it's fine.
Yeah. So we will go on. I think you've answered most of the question, and it was a comment, so, and need much more discussion.
Yeah.
So, John.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Your book is, as you have introduced it, not as I've read it, but is very rich indeed. I want to apply it personally now, so this is sort of bringing it down to a personal level, rather as you started in your own presentation.
Mm-hmm.
I spent many years working with African indigenous churches as an Anglican missionary, but and I'm now back 15 years in this country as an Anglican lay minister, but in some sense, by the indigenous church that I had become a member of.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have never properly had the language to describe this relationship that I had in that indigenous church, and now back here in the UK. But you have given me the language, or rather it is emerging from the connection you make between Catholicity and mission.
Mm-hmm.
I think you said something like understanding, Catholicity is understanding your own identity in relation to the universal church, or your own individual identity in relation to the universal church. Something like that, does that?
Yeah. I think the individual identity and, the identity of your immediate community.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And so in a sense, I see there that, and this will be true of many people, that my presence as an outsider, insider in another faith community, and even in my return presence to my own country as the opposite, an insider, outsider, reflecting what I have learnt back there, that this is, in your language, both an expression of Catholicity and of mission.
Oh, yes, so, absolutely. Yes.
Thank you. So that's, I'm just saying that. Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So we will have Christian as one of the last questions, yes, as we're running out.
Okay. Thank you, Stephen, for your book and for your presentation. I have to confess that I'm a big fan of your academic work. So thank you so much for all the books and articles that you wrote.
Very welcome.
My last question is about your definition of the church. So I think you try to embrace all the important concepts and elements to form that definition. And I see that you brought enough things about the Son and the Spirit in terms of their identity and their roles. But I wonder, you brought enough about the Father, his identity role in your definition. So I wonder, theologically, it is really balanced actually in terms of forming that definition from the perspective of Holy Trinity.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a good question. and what's implicit in there, of course, is that the election. I think I'm trying to remember that it's the definition of the church is the church is the people gathered together by the Spirit in faith in the risen Christ, in order to embody, demonstrate, and proclaim the reign of God. And there's where I think there's a Trinitarian movement in the definition, and the Father aspect is maybe more implicit, but I think the Father is the sender, is the chooser, is the sender, so to speak, and I think I somehow also allude to the Trinitarian dimension when I talk about the three images of the church that I talk about, the traditional major images of the church, the people of God, so there's the Father, the body of Christ and the temple of the Spirit, so there is a Trinitarian dimension, but I maybe in the definition, it's more implicit than it is explicit. But I don't mean to, certainly don't mean to ignore the Father at all. But it's kind of like this, this movement that is moving toward, the fullness of the Trinity in my development and in my definition. But I'll keep that in mind. Maybe I have worked on that definition really for 50 years. And it used to be much shorter, and then somebody would say, "Well, what about this? And what about this?" And and then I would add the different things. So possibly, there's maybe more of the first person of the Trinity should come in, but certainly I hope you see that it's implicitly Trinitarian, and that runs through, I think, the whole nature of the church as I try to develop it, and it runs through all the chapters of the book. So, but thank you very much for pointing that out. And I certainly didn't want to ignore the Father at all. I really wanted to emphasize, the Trinitarian nature,
Yeah. Thank you very much, Steve, for a lecture. And yes, I think we have much more to discuss, even without you, I think, here among ourselves, reflecting on what you have shared with us. And with that, we will end our meeting. Thank you very much, all those of you who have joined very early in the morning and also very late in the evening.
Yeah.
Thank you.